Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And I'm Steve Hayes.
And we are this week's edition of the FAIRtax Guys. Still don't have that delay down there right, so we can get that all together in one shot, here we.
I know.
Oh, well.
We need to record it and just clip it in.
All right, we'll get
about that afterwards. But, you know, we don't have a whole lot of time on this show because it's jam-packed with information from Steve Hayes, fresh back from the hearing in the tax subcommittee of the House Ways and Means Committee. So,
yeah, so Steve, when we had you,
you look good up there.
When we had you a couple of weeks ago, I wasn't planning on having you back quite this quickly, even though we do enjoy having you on the program. But as we mentioned, I didn't know at that time that you would be testifying before the Ways and Means Committee, or at least a subcommittee thereof on taxation. So let's just go ahead and roll that video right here, and then we can come back and talk about it.
Mr. Hayes, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly and Ranking Member Thompson. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. First of all, I am not an economist. I don't work for a think tank. I came here because I became convinced during my time of practice that the existing income tax was actually harming the country and that there should be a better way of collecting the taxes needed to fund the government. I didn't realize I was far right until Mr. Thompson's comments told me, because I've never felt myself that way. I felt myself much more moderate. I'm looking at this not as a Democrat, Republican issue, but as what I believe would be a more effective way of funding the government. I worked for a long time, I will confess, as a tax attorney. I made a lot of money out of all the confusion in the tax code. But I saw time and again people who I worked with who were in different parts of the country get audited and get widely different results, from no tax to assessment of tax on the same investment. The tax code is not sensible. It's very difficult to apply. As a practical matter, it makes life worse for most people who are working in this country and employing those who are working in this country. So what I'm looking at is trying to be a resource. Maybe it's not the sole answer, but I believe you need to start looking as a committee at ways in which you can fund the government without putting all of the compliance issues on the American people and American business. Let's do it in a way that's pro-growth, because it's a consumption tax, and I think everybody at this table will agree with me, it's going to produce more growth than the income tax. And let's do it where we grant people some authority over their own taxes, because what am I promoting? The fair tax. It's a retail sales tax on new retail goods and retail services. Underline new retail goods. If you've got a family of 4, because of provision that we put in the bill, called a prebate, you are going to see that your expenditures up to $40,000 are not subject to tax at all. You talk about a tax credit, they get $40,000 of spending without any tax or the fair tax at all. Very, very different than the present system, because what you're also doing with the fair tax is not only are you repealing all of the income taxes, the gift tax, the estate tax, but you're also taking and getting rid of the most regressive tax that we have, which is the payroll tax. Every single American, if they make $1,000, or this year $160,000, is going to pay it regardless of family size, regardless of anything else. It's the very definition of regressive. That is gone. Eliminate it. It's funded through the fair tax, the national retail sales tax. It's very obvious. If you don't want to pay as much tax, don't spend as much. If you don't want to pay as much tax, buy used goods and don't pay the tax. But you have a choice. It's not everybody pays the same tax on the same money. We're not children. Treat us like adults. Let us make the decision. Now, having said that, anything that I can do to assist you in any way, I'm happy to do it. Whether it means not pushing through the fair tax, but it helps improve the system, then I'm fine. And so I'm here. I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
All right. Steve, as I was watching that, the question that kept running through my mind over and over again is, what am I actually watching here? Is this a serious attempt? Is Congress really serious about reforming the tax code, or is this some kind of dog and pony show and things are just going to go on as usual?
Dog and pony show.
That's what I was afraid of.
But here's the thing I think that's really important, is they let the camel get his nose under the tent. Because
you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Because what happened is that it's almost like if you testify before the Ways and Means Committee, the amount of gravitas or the amount of deference and respect you're given goes way up. And like I mentioned to another member, about testifying, and they, okay. And we talked some more, and they said, well, I have questions sometimes about these tax matters that I'm voting on. Would it be okay to call you? And it's like you get a different positioning as a movement and, individually, I guess, as well, but primarily for fair tax, because we've got our nose under the tent. There are Democrats on that committee who I believe two for sure, and the third one maybe, that I believe we can have a meaningful dialogue with and have some common ground on going to a different kind of taxation for different reasons. But I think that was a benefit we would not have gotten had we not been given the opportunity to testify.
Okay, well, there's more to this than just what we saw in that little video clip. There was a written testimony as well, was there not? And there's a link to that up on fairtax.org if people want to go and read the whole thing, which was, you were given 5 minutes to talk, but I know you've got more than 5 minutes worth of information in your head there.
Well, we were able to submit what we thought was a good piece of data for anyone that seriously wants to look at the fair tax as a real proposal. And the next hearing, what I'm expecting, and it will probably not happen, it might not even happen next year, to be honest with you, because of the election. But the next hearing on tax reform, I believe we're going to get a seat at the table, and it will be more direct. And instead of their being told by the Democratic chairman or ranking member to attack the fair tax, and incidentally, all of us are members of it, as a far right-wing conspiracy and, a kook group and whatever, which is effectively what they were saying. And what I think is important is, like Paula, my wife, was in the audience, and she was thinking of the Gandhi quote, which we have used before, where he was talking about his struggle for India independence from the British.
Mm-hmm.
And he did it for many, many years before it finally became a reality. And he said that here's the thing about a movement like that. First of all, when you start, they ignore you because they think you'll just go away and stop if you're ignored. If that doesn't work, then what they start doing is ridiculing you and laughing at you. Oh, that's stupid. That's what a kook. And if that doesn't work to stop you, then they attack you. And they attack you in every way they can. And when that doesn't work, you win. And that was Gandhi. And that's what, Paula said she was thinking about, that actually all of these gratuitous attacks, which were made even worse because they were looking at me attacking the fair tax, and they ask a question of the person to my left who had no clue about the fair tax, except talking points he'd been fed before the hearing. It was all a setup. Paula said she watched these people like Congresswoman Sanchez read from prepared remarks, I guess her staff made, and she would read, and then she would ask Berman was his name, sitting on my left, to agree with her, and he would read the prepared remarks back, and then she would pick up on her script because she was, he was saying what he had been scripted to say, and she would continue on. And like that was, an example. And that's what happened with them, because they really are worried about the fair tax. They're worried about something that changes because they believe the income tax code allows them to make a lot of social changes and not have to vote on it directly, but to bury it in the income tax code. In other words, child credits or earned income credits or any of these types of benefits, they don't have to have a bill that includes them and vote on it. They simply bury it in the tax code. And they like that. Both sides. I'm not just talking to the Democrats. Republicans like that too, because then they have the ability to have someone lobby for a special benefit, and it might be a business that wants to expense an unlimited amount of money to buy equipment. Well, they put that in the tax code. And you can expense it in 1 year as opposed to having to deduct it over 5, 10, 15 years. So it is a very convenient way for them to do it. And it attracts very little attention from most people, because whenever you get into tax matters and tax legislation, people tend to tune out. But when you have an actual legislative piece on the floor, it's very easy then to focus on it, and for all of the social media and everybody to bring up and say, do we really want to do this? And I believe a lot of what the Democrat opposition is obfuscation, meaning they want to hide some of the things they're doing and not have to explain them to everybody. Now, interestingly enough, Congressman Davis, Danny Davis from Chicago, he represents a district where he said he had a number of very low income people and some of the higher income people in the state, maybe the country, in his district. So he has extremes both ways. And he was questioning how it was going to affect the lower income people and why I felt like it would not be bad. I mean, legitimate questions. Mm-hmm. And he actually gave me a chance to respond, unlike his cohorts. And afterwards, I went over to him and I said, Congressman, I think there may be some common ground for us, because to be clear, what we're talking about is a system that raises the money that you then decide how to spend. We are agnostic. We don't care how you're going to spend it. We're simply going to raise it in a better way that gets rid of all this filing, all these forms, all this confusion, and it frankly gives you the money. And then you go out and, based on what you and your colleagues decide, can spend the money. And his comment to me, that's a very interesting idea. And I'm working to get a meeting set up with him in Chicago now, because I think he is there. John Larson is a Democrat representing a district in Hartford area. And John was also very interested. And his particular issue was primarily, at least he addressed it in the hearing, Social Security. And looking at the fact that Social Security was going to be cut 20% for our seniors. And we may even lose Social Security if we don't make changes, for people going forward. And I said, totally, I don't want to see Social Security die either. I enjoy getting the checks, but, the fair tax actually makes it solvent. It makes it work. And if you don't look at it that way, look at it as what evasion does. I told him this privately, does, because in order to evade the $500 billion that the IRS says is unpaid, you've got to earn at least $5 trillion. And if you take the Social Security tax of 15.3% on that, you're talking about having $750 billion a year going to the trust fund. They were only short $85 billion last year. You're talking about, if you had the ability to collect it, collecting all of that money. But because they're never going to collect it, because people who are not reporting income aren't going to self-identify. Bob Scarborough is not going to say, oh, by the way, I received $20,000 in other fees, which I didn't report.
Yeah, it's kind of like what you see in publication 17 about making sure if you steal your neighbor's lawnmower that you either return it by the end of the year or you have to report it on a form and send it in April.
Right. Yeah. And so basically, the Peterson Foundation referred to a CBO study that I think I may have mentioned on the show before, but they said that the $80 billion being put into the IRS over 10 years would recover $200 billion of uncollected tax. So we're talking about over 10 years collecting an additional 120 billion of what by then will be, even if you use IRS numbers, 5 trillion. A very, very tiny percent. So it's not going to work. But with the fair tax, it is going to work because you are able to collect a much higher percentage of the tax that's due. And so Larson's interested in meeting. In fact, they've already reached back and we're trying to find a date. And then the third one is Congressman Doggett from Texas, who I believe is also reachable in the sense that we can find some common ground.
All right, let me ask you something real quickly here. The body that you were testifying before was a subcommittee of the House Ways and Means Committee, the Subcommittee on Taxation. I understand that the actual chairman of the whole Ways and Means Committee had a little conversation with you as well. What was that all about?
He did. He came in. It was a great surprise to the other members because he doesn't normally do this, apparently. I didn't know it. But he showed up. And
now, who are we talking about?
Jason Smith from Missouri.
Okay.
He showed up. I have a theory that I will share with you. I think he was the one that invited me. It was at his direction I was invited. And he had his staff watching the hearing. And I think he saw that I was being attacked by the Democrats and not given a chance to respond. And I don't know if this is true, but I think it may be the way he asked his question. He wanted to make sure I get a chance to respond. And so he asked questions of me directly so that I could respond. And I thought that was very significant. And I think that there is possibly a way of meeting with him. I'm trying to get a meeting with him. I'm trying to do this in their home district office because when you're in DC, I can't tell you how many times I've had meetings with people that wanted to meet. They had their whole staff there to talk about this plan. And they suddenly got a vote call that was unplanned. And instead of 30 minutes, we had 10.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't a hoax because you see on the screen in the well of the House, giving their pro or con on the vote. So they're there, and the whole process took well past the time to get back, and then they had another vote. So in their offices at home, though, if you ask them for, if they give you 30 minutes or 40 minutes, you almost always get it.
All
So-
right. How,
So
how
that's
do
what
we
I'm trying to do.
how do we prod the Congress to move this from the dog and pony show realm into serious reality?
Well, I think what we do is continue to press them on the fact that what you're confused about, if you're Bob Scarborough or Bob Paxton, is why they are not in favor of a system that works better for most Americans, that doesn't require all these forms to be filled out and doesn't require the IRS. What is it that's wrong with that? What is it that they don't like about that idea of giving Americans more freedom, giving them more choice? And I think it's a very difficult question for them to answer. Now, part of my plan when I testified was not to just lambaste them, for that purpose, but was to be as collegial as I could be, because what I want to do is get a dialogue going. And I think that's why maybe I reached some of the the ones I mentioned. If you don't like the proposal, a part of it, don't condemn the whole thing. Let's fix it. Let's find a way to adjust it to where it addresses your concerns. But let's not throw the whole thing out just because there's one element you don't like. If you don't think, for example, that you want everyone to see the fair tax rate on every receipt, and I've had this as an objection. People are going to be horrified, at the cost of government. And I said, yes, they will be. Then do it inclusive, like they do in Europe. In other words, that dollar you pay for that candy or whatever, 77 cents is for the candy and 23 cents is tax. It's not quite as abrasive to a purchaser when he doesn't see the tax. Well, if we had to do that to get rid of the income tax in the present system, probably most of us could find a way to do that. It's not pure, but boy, it's an improvement.
All right, let me ask you something else real quick. I noticed that you were seated next to Grover Norquist.
Yes.
Who we talked about earlier, his organization sending his letter to all the fair tax supporters, urging them to withdraw their support for the fair tax. Did he have anything to say to you that we didn't see?
I've known Grover 30 years. When we both came over before it started, he was very, his usual, very friendly self to me. He shook hands, said, "It's good to see you again." And I had been told, I knew all about Grover doing that, but on the panels I've been on with Grover in the past, even though his donors don't want him to support the fair tax, he's always been very careful not to attack it directly with me there. And part of that's probably, just sort of friendship, but most of it, I think, is he knows I could probably embarrass him pretty badly. So he didn't do it. In fact, when I finished my remarks, he leaned over and said, "Very good job, Steve." And so, that's Grover with me. That's been my experience with Grover. And I think if he didn't have other pressures on him, I think he would see the merits of the fair tax. I think his primary thing, honestly, and he's told me this in person, is that he believes there are things that we can win as a group in terms of tax reform that are much more doable than the fair tax. And getting people's attention on the fair tax takes away from some of those, gains that we could make. And I think he really believes that. But I do also think that if we started to get a lot of momentum for the fair tax, that his group would come to the table and try to address the issues that they think are important. And at least one that probably can't be addressed, and that's the impact on imports, because some of his biggest donors are heavy importers, and they don't want to see this big advantage of the imports not being subject to U.S. tax go away.
Oh, Bob, you've been uncharacteristically quiet so far. You got any questions for our guest here?
I've been listening. Wouldn't you say that? And you mentioned, the show. It was a lot to do with folks posturing, and they had prepared notes and things like that. And you've testified in a setting similar to that, have you not? Have you?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, a
was
couple of times.
was it about the FAIRtax specifically?
Yes.
So what was different about those times and this last one in terms of the atmosphere in the room?
It's been 20 years, but basically the difference was that the Democrats, even though they might disagree, it was much more professional and collegial. They would say, well, Mr. Hayes, I am myself not a supporter, and let me tell you why. You know, that type of thing. I remember, I forget where he was from, Illinois, I believe. And they weren't attacking me as being, roadkill or whatever. And they give me an opportunity to respond. This particular group just reflected, I think, Bob, the entire change in Congress, where people weren't listening to each other. They were reading prepared remarks, and some of the members were reading prepared remarks that they would use on their website or in a campaign clip or whatever. And that was their purpose. Their purpose really was to look at getting tax reform. There were a few that were right. I'm not saying all of them. But the majority, I think their purpose was this was a way for me to make a statement that will help me.
All right, you're breaking up a little bit. I hope we're getting most of this. Now, let me point out the fact also that there is a little bit more of the video when you were responding to a question that we didn't include that clip in this program. But that video is up on the FAIRtax YouTube channel if people would like to look at that extra bit. And if you want to watch the whole, 2.5, almost 3 hours, that video is available up there as well.
Yeah. And the ironic thing is when I showed up and I was talking to the Ways and Means staff, I said, how many people do you expect there? Because one time I testified and there were like 6 members, out of 25.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, oh, we're hoping to get it 5 or 6 or more. But everything is so busy because they're trying to get out of here. They're going, doing this, they're doing markups, and they're all on different committees besides the Ways and Means. All the members showed up. And all of them had at least 5 minutes, which meant that's why it went so long, because she expected that it would be over an hour and a half. And it went almost twice that long because the members showed up and because of the, discussions and what happened. I talked to Congressman Kelly afterwards and I said, I didn't expect to not be given an opportunity to respond. And he went like this, and says, that's the way it goes around here sometimes.
Well, I think the fact that you were even invited to speak at all is a positive step that the Congress critters, as Dr. Linder said a while back, are eventually going to just have to, come face to face with the fact that the income tax system is broken. It doesn't work. We've got to do something different. And hopefully we can turn this from a dog and pony show into true tax reform. See, one other thing real quickly, I'm glad we had you back this quick, because this is a rather momentous episode of FAIRtax Power Radio. This is episode number 400.
Wow.
I'm assuming that when Ron Valero was doing the video part and all the video editing and putting it up there, we just numbered those 1, 2, 3, 400 consecutively. But this is number 400. And so we are glad to have you here for this special occasion, and invite you as well to watch next week when Bob and I are going to be going through the 2023 Tax Proposal Hall of Shame, all of the crazy stuff that the Congress critters have been trying to put into the tax code for the past year. And So we'll just encourage you to keep up the good fight, and we'll hope to have you back here on FAIRtax Power Radio sometime soon, maybe not in 2 or 3 weeks, but we'll see you sometime next year for sure.
I look forward to it, and I wish both of you a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
And you as well. Thank you for that, Steve. Thank you.
All right, and that is going to wrap up this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and sharing the videos. We certainly appreciate you doing that. Until we meet again to look at the Hall of Shame next week, I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
I'm Steve Hayes.
We're the FAIRtax Guys, reminding you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax, and once you understand it,
You'll demand it.
So tell me, how could I pay less taxes?
Less.
Yeah, I'm trying to get ahead, so how can I pay less?
Well, I suppose you could pay less taxes by earning less money, or you could give to charity.
How is that going to help?
Actually, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but if you know the right people, okay, or if you have a really good lawyer, you can usually get around the big ones.
If I may, under the fair tax, to pay less taxes, you would simply consume less. You would control how much you pay and when you pay your taxes simply by choosing what you purchase and when you purchase something.
So I could stay focused and get ahead.
Exactly.